So good evening, everybody. Let's begin with our motivation this evening. So we intellectually understand that we're getting old. As time goes on, get sick, and eventually die. We know that intellectually, but if we deeply thought every day about the fact that death is certain, that the time of death uncertain, and that all that we take to the next life is our karma, both virtuous and non-virtuous, how different would we live our lives? We deeply knew that truth about every living being without exception. The great masters have taught that if we don't think about death in the morning, we have wasted our morning. If we don't think about death in the afternoon, we've wasted our afternoon. And if we don't think about death in the evening, we've wasted our evening. Now, this isn't supposed to depress us, because chances are most of us don't think of death most of the time. But it's to state a very clear truth about our lives in order to bring a kind of vibrancy, a kind of clarity, a kind of peace to our lives. Because if we think about death, we are clear about what we want to do that gives meaning to our lives. It helps us focus on our intention to contribute to the peace of the world, and helps us to create the causes for our Buddhahood. So rather than obsessing about the small sufferings and disappointments of life by which we continue to create suffering and pain for ourselves, we try and remember that at the time of death we want our minds and hearts to be very familiar with the Dharma, with bodhicitta, with kindness, with compassion, wisdom. And we want our minds to be free of anger, of fear, clinging, or any kind of remorse. And to have that kind of familiarity with the Buddha's teachings on kindness and compassion and bodhicitta, we have to understand that at the time of death, what we habituated our minds to think about during our lives is what is going to be going on in our minds when we're dying. We can't live a life with a mind and heart filled with anger, resentment, attachment, worry, greed, and grudge holding, and then at the time of death expect our minds to turn on a dime to be suddenly filled with love, forgiveness, courage, bodhicitta, gratitude. Our minds will be filled with whatever we filled them with during our lives. So by filling our minds during our life with virtue, with wholesome actions of body, speech, and mind, now while we're alive, and to get really, really familiar with those states of mind, and generate a joy and lightness which will help us at the time of death to not be so afraid or to have any remorse on how we spent our lives. So tonight as we listen to the teachings, let's do that in order to benefit all beings, to transform our minds, to prepare for death, to cultivate all those qualities in our minds now, so that at the time of the death, our minds will be so familiar with all the virtuous qualities that the Buddha taught, and then therefore we will die without any regret. So let's practice tonight listening to the Dharma for the benefit of all beings. So while Venerable's away in Europe, we're doing some reviews on the Gomchen Lamrim. And for tonight, our review is on death and impermanence. So when we were getting ready to do this retreat, it didn't occur to me till about a week and a half ago that we were going to be talking about death and impermanence before our Sharing Our Joy retreat. And I said, wow, how is that going to go? But it is said that by thinking about death, we can actually generate a kind of peace, a kind of joy, a kind of clarity in our minds. So maybe they're not as far apart as they seem. So tonight, hopefully, I've garnered from these teachings that Venerable gave last year to maybe, if we keep our hearts and minds open, we'll be able to see how by thinking about death in the way that the Buddha has asked us to think about it, we might actually be able to generate a sense of aliveness, a sense of joy in our minds, because these lives are so precious. Understanding death and impermanence is a very powerful topic in the Dharma, and that I'm hoping that by speaking about it tonight, we can sort of expand our perspective on how thinking about it frequently can actually affect our lives in a very, very beneficial, a very, very helpful way. Because in our culture, we have a very, very strong aversion to talking about death. I mean, after all, our loved ones leave. We leave all the things that we treasure, all the things that we love in our life when we die. And how dying really scares a lot of people. I've heard from more than one person that it's not so much the dying that scares them, it's the pain that they think they might experience while they are dying. So we're going to take a look at it in a way that the Buddha wants us to look at death and see if we can somehow open up our perspective about this process, this natural process that without exception, every living being in this world experiences. And we have to hold that in our minds tonight, because we're going to look at the disadvantages of not remembering it and then all of the benefits of being able to remember it in our life. But we have to understand that it's, even though we die alone, it is a shared experience of every living being in our world. So we have a commonality. It's something that we can connect each and every living being with, and not to forget that. It is also a topic taught by the Buddha that ties in very, very nicely to a teaching that we had last week that Venerable Semkye reviewed on precious human life. That we have these beautiful lives that are very, very rare. We have what they call freedoms and fortunes. We have very conducive circumstances to be able to have interest in spiritual practice, particularly the Dharma, to have a roof over our heads, to have minds that work, that have bodies that work, that have supportive friends who encourage our spiritual pursuits. And when we connect that with the fact that we're going to die, it really brings the precious human life even into awareness of its rarity and its value even more. Because eventually, no matter how precious it is, eventually it is going to end. So the precious human life and the death together sort of become a very powerful counter force for the mind that's really concerned about the happiness of just this life. Actually, it's an obsession that we have with the happiness of this life. So we're going to focus on the disadvantages of not remembering death and the advantages of remembering it, in the hopes of bringing us to a heartfelt determination to up the awareness of what we do in our life. Why we do what we do. What do we do? What do we put our energy in? What in our life is worth putting time into? And what isn't worth it? And how to benefit living beings along the way. So thinking about death really gets us to set our priorities straight and to look over our life with this very clear overview saying, what am I doing and what's worth doing and what isn't? It's really quite a powerful way to bring clarity and bring prioritizing what we do in our life much, much closer to being meaningful, worthwhile, and beneficial. So a few years ago, I was doing a review on ethical conduct, one of the far-reaching practices that we have in the Buddhist teachings. And I was using Geshe Sopa's book, Steps on the Path to Enlightenment. And he asked the question, how do we develop this powerful desire to do certain things and to avoid others? It comes from a firm understanding of what we are doing and why we're doing it. We always try to make informed decisions based on the purpose, on why we're doing something, and what are the results of our actions of what we're doing. We want to know what we're going to get out of something. if we see clearly that there's a lot of disadvantages on what we're about to do, chances are we're going to avoid it. If we get to see the immense benefit of what we're about to endeavor, chances are we're going to do it. Furthermore, we have to be convinced that the benefits are achievable through our actions. So this is not just, as Geshe Sopa is putting it in regards to ethical conduct, this kind of thinking about why we do some things and why we don't do other things is pros and cons. We make decisions in our life all the time about whether it's to buy a house, which school to go to, what type of medical treatments, what computer to purchase. When we do things like that, we're going to say, what are we going to get out of this? What are the pros of doing it this way, and what are the cons if I do it this way? And so what the Buddha did is that he has presented many times when he taught the Dharma, is that he used this type of reasoning. Because when we see the benefits of something, as Venerable Semkye said today in the BBC, it perks up our ears. We have a lot of attention. What's in this that is going to be of benefit? And at the same time, when we look at the things that aren't going to be helpful, it also gets our attention. And chances are we're not going to do it. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to look at the disadvantages of not meditating on death. All right, so Venerable jokingly, when she did the commentary on this last year, she said there's this in our culture, it's called the carrot and stick approach. So looking at the disadvantages of not remembering death is sort of the stick approach. For those of people like me, I tend to be complacent and kind of, yeah, maybe tomorrow. So sometimes instilling in me a kind of wisdom fear that if I don't do something, there's going to be results that I'm not going to be happy with. And then there are folks who are more on the carrot approach that if they see the benefits, they get really inspired and they're willing to really put effort in it because they see that they're going to have some sort of results that are going to be very satisfying and very beneficial. So first we're going to do the stick approach. The drawbacks of not meditating on the awareness of death. So the Gomchen Lamrim states, by thinking every single day, today I will not die, and being concerned solely with this life, the eye of your intelligence declines, I-E-Y-E. Your virtue is weak, and your three doors of body, speech, and mind are involved in wrongdoing. What could be worse than turning your back on the teachings in this way? Consequently, from the depths of your heart, contemplate your death and see that the importance you attribute to this life is futile. Okay, so we're going to get to see why, if we don't think about death at least once a day, what the disadvantages of that are. So this is going to be helpful. So first, for those of us with spiritual endeavors and spiritual aspirations, we don't remember to practice. We constantly fool ourselves thinking that the situation of this life are set and have some lasting quality about them. So the first disadvantage is that we really see that our life here is very, very permanent, that the things in our life are going to last. I've got my house, I've got my job, I've got my family, I've got my health, I've got my life, I've got it good. And that they're all going to last a really long time. Because we have a sense that things are lasting, we have no interest in contemplating the impermanence of our world, much less the fact that we are impermanent phenomena changing moment by moment. We were different than when we woke up this morning. During the course of the day, we've had situations arise, abide, and go away. All day long, our world and ourselves are changing moment by moment. And yet, we don't register this in our minds and how it affects us most of the time. Unfortunately, we are obsessed with accumulating wealth, fame, comfort, material goods, as if they're going to be around for a really long time, and that we're going to last as long as well as they are, as long as they are as well. We use a lot of energy directed towards finding the happiness of this life through finding those things we find. And then once we find them, we spend a lot of energy protecting them. So once again, as I go through these points, look at your life and just say, is what she's saying right now true? Okay, so we're going to put the Buddhist teachings tonight through a little bit of a life experience. So as we go through these, just say, okay, is what she's saying true? So how much of our life do we spend accumulating wealth, fame, being comfortable, possessions? And we buy them, we purchase them, we acquire them thinking that we're going to have them for a while and we're going to be able to enjoy them for a while. And once we get them, we enjoy them, we spend time protecting them, putting them in a safe place, taking care of them, keeping them clean. And we also worry a lot about averting any unhappiness that comes in our life. So when you think of the course of the day, how much do we try to be comfortable? We try to get the things that we need that'll sort of afford that kind of comfort, and that we do a little bit of navigating our life to try to avert unhappiness and discomfort as much as possible. So the Buddhist teachings are not on the radar screen most of the time. So not have taken any interest on the fact that our lives are fleeting, that the things that we acquire, whether it be fame or reputation or material goods, don't last very long. When the time of death comes, chances are we're going to be really caught totally unprepared. Even though, once again, we intellectually know that it's going to happen. When it finally happens, it's like, how can it be? I was fine. Even if we're terminally ill, we still say, I'm not ready. How can that be? So the first disadvantage of not remembering death is that we don't practice. We believe that things are going to last. We believe that things are going to be forever, that we believe ourselves are going to last, that we're not going to die. And if we're going to die, it's going to be way, 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 way off in the future somewhere. Okay, so that's the first disadvantage. The second one is, okay, we remember to practice, but we don't. So we have the Dharma in our lives. We've met the Buddhist teachings. We know what we need to do as far as preparing for our future lives. But our lack of constant death awareness will make us procrastinate in actually adopting, integrating the practice in our life. And then instead, this perpetual mind of procrastination settles in, where there's always something more important to do than practice. We've got family, we've got our social circle, we've got the internet, we're making money, we have relationships, so many things that we have to do, rather than endeavor in our spiritual pursuits and our spiritual practice. We know better, but the infatuation, the attraction of the happiness of just this life is too strong. And so we put off our practice until tomorrow. Thinking that I will not die tomorrow, we can at least wait until then to put into practice what we've learned. So it's always mañana, mañana, mañana. I see that in myself, even here. So at this point, I have a book by Geshe Now Dargay. It's called An Anthology of Well-Spoken Advice. He was one of Venerable's teachers way back in the 70s. And he says, okay, we're going to clarify this about, having family, having social life, having a living, having relationships. He says, now humans tend to go to extremes. Okay, we might think, okay, the Buddha says no worldly activity, so I'm going to sell my house, I'm going to leave my husband, I'm going to leave my children, quit my job, and go live in a cave. He says, although we should not have our main concern be with the affairs of this life, it doesn't mean we become totally unworldly creatures incapable of living a day-to-day life. Okay, so humans, we tend to go very extreme, black and white. It's either this or that, but there's nothing in between. So the fear of this is that when we think about the Buddha is saying that we have to really stop obsessing about the happiness of this life, we think that we have to totally surrender everything. Give up our life, give up our good friends, give up good food, give up our family. That's not what the Buddha is saying. He says, let's put this stuff in perspective. Let's put some energy into prioritizing what's meaningful and integrate these things into our life in a meaningful way. Okay, so that's the second point, is that we know how to practice, but we don't. Okay, so third, we're moving a little bit in an interesting direction. Okay, we remember to practice, but we don't practice purely. So here we are practicing. We're still not always mindful of death. So our practices get polluted by what we call in Tibetan Buddhism the 8 worldly concerns, which are basically very short. There's a short little saying about them. We get caught in loss or gain, praise or blame, fame or shame, pleasure or pain. So our practice becomes polluted by all of these things. Either we give to charities to increase our reputation and our status. We go to all of these retreats. We have these empowerments, we go to all of these teachings, and then we come home, we tell people all about what we've done and what a great practitioner we are. Or we go to India, we go to do these beautiful pilgrimages, and we spend all of our time shopping. And because of that, our minds go up and down depending on which of the 8 worldly concerns is in our mind. So if we're attached to our reputation, we spend our practice trying to negotiate that to increase how people think of us. If we want to be praised, then we negotiate our practice, and our practice gets polluted on how we appear to people, and so that's polluted by our wanting to be praised and not to be criticized. And so Geshe Nawan Darge says, I got some pieces in here that I wanted to share with you. He has some wonderful language for these 8 worldly concerns. So this is how we sometimes pollute our beautiful spiritual practice on. We want to transform our minds into love, compassion, wisdom, bodhicitta. But instead, we have these very childish attitudes that we're going to have to learn to outgrow so that we can cultivate these good qualities. So these are what we spend a lot of our time on, and why we don't do our practice well, is that we are either pleased and delighted when receiving things such as gift and money, or we're very upset and displeased or depressed when we don't receive them. We're displeased, depressed, or disappointed when things don't go well and we are sick. We're pleased when all is going well and we are happy and healthy. We are pleased and excited when hearing pleasant sounds and good news and communication from our loved ones. Displeased and annoyed when not hearing such things. And being pleased when praised or complimented, and being displeased or disheartened when abused or degraded. So we look at the course of our life when we're trying to endeavor in our spiritual practices. These are the things that hook us. So that's what the Buddha is trying to say, is that we practice, but we don't practice purely. And one of the reasons that we don't is because we forget about death. We forget about the fleeting nature of our life. So we go wandering into just the happiness of this life. And the 8 worldly concerns is how we negotiate trying to get the happiness of this life, and how to avert the unhappiness of this life. And these are things that we spend a whole lot of time on. So he has a sample of one of the great Tibetan sages, Longri Tangpa, who did the 8 verses of thought transformation. So this is what happens when you practice the Dharma purely, and you don't have the 8 worldly concerns floating around in your mind. He was one of the great wise monks of Tibetan Buddhism. So one day he was delivering a discourse to thousands of his disciples, and a sickly child was born nearby. An astrologer told the mother that to save the infant's life, she must take it to a high spiritual master and claim it to be his child. Obediently, the mother brought the baby to Longri Tangpo in the middle of his teachings with all these thousands of students, and declared before everyone that it was his. He gradually accepted and said, "For all of my lives, you have been my child." Half of the disciples lost faith and immediately walked out. They thought it was his child from this life, but the rest of the audience stayed. At the end of the teaching, the mother presented the master with offerings and apologized by explaining the situation. Longri Tangpa simply gave the child back. Throughout the entire scene, he maintained complete equanimity, and for half of the disciples who stayed, their faith remained unaffected. If anything, it grew even stronger. But we could not bear such an occurrence had it happened to us. We would have made a big scene by trying to prove ourselves innocent. But to Longri Tangpa, it made no difference. He knew he had done nothing wrong. Thus, if we maintain a pure practice within, we do not have to impress others that we are holy by external displays of false piety or by never associating with worldly, ordinary people. So when our practice is done purely, whatever happens in our life, up or down, we're going to be able to have some sort of balance in our life. And that's just an example of what happens when we remember death on a daily basis. Our minds become very, very balanced because the 8 worldly concerns aren't just pulling us around all over the place. Okay, number 4, if we don't remember death, we lose the determination to practice intensely and consistently. So if we don't remember death, our practice lacks intensity, it lacks strength, it lacks consistency. We know our entire practice memorized by rote. We can do it totally by rote and not be present at all. Our minds could be planning the day, we could be thinking about our relationships, the fight that we had yesterday, the movie that we're going to go to tonight, and we're going through our entire practice. We have it totally memorized. There's nobody home. Our practice can be dry, can be boring, can be unsatisfying. And because we don't think that our life could end sometime soon, and that we could find ourselves in another realm of existence, we don't have any intensity in our life. So by not thinking about death, there's no intensity when we practice, and there's no hurry to practice. So that's another disadvantage, is that if we don't think about death, there's no richness, there's no nourishment, there's no juiciness in our practice. It just gets boring and dry because there's not this impetus to say, gosh, my life is so short, I don't know, I could die tomorrow. If we don't have that as sort of this propelling energy behind our practice, it just becomes dry and rote, and it's no fun. It's no fun. Number 5, we create a lot of destructive actions which not only cause unfortunate rebirth, but obscure our minds or prevent us from attaining liberation. So the whole thing on not remembering death is that we are totally focused on the happiness of just this life, that we'll do whatever is necessary to get it without concerns for our actions, how they might harm others. We don't think about our precepts, we don't think about our personal integrity, that my actions are destructive. So without thinking about death, we just create a lot of unwholesome actions. We don't think about, if I were to die tomorrow, do I want to be in my life creating discord and disharmony? Do I want to be lying? Do I want to be taking things that aren't freely given? Do I want to be concerned about just my reputation of this life? So Venerable says it's almost like being a donkey with a ring in our nose. We just get followed around by all of our destructive actions. They just pull us over here, they just pull us over there, because we forget about how important this life is and how precious it is, and that it's not going to last long. Then lastly, when we sum up all of those 5 points, probably the most tragic and the greatest disadvantage of not thinking and remembering about death is that we die with regret. Because we've wasted all of our time doing these, as Venerable says, stupid, useless things. We don't think about purifying our unwholesome actions. We don't accumulate merit. We don't listen to teachings or integrate them in our life. We spend our whole life protecting our friends, our family, making sure people like us, protecting our reputation, gathering wealth. And the thing is that at the time of death, all of that stuff doesn't matter. None of that goes with us. But what does go with us is the seeds of the destructive actions that we have created in acquiring those things. And so this sense of regret or remorse at the time of death, it would be probably the most tragic state of mind to have. When I think about what kind of mind I don't want to have when I die, it's the mind that says, I wish that I could have done things different. And the thing is that if you've met the Dharma and you've met the Buddha's teachings, it's even more tragic because you've had the tools, you've had the medicine chest right there at your fingertips. And instead we've made choices just engaged just in the happiness of this life, disregarding our integrity, our ethical values, our precepts. And at the time of death, we're just like, oh, what was I thinking? Okay, so we're finishing up the disadvantages. We'll get to the
You're faded out. You're gone
beyond. See? Impermanence. The impermanence of the ever-ready bunny batteries. Oh, they are not permanent. Okay, thank you. All right. So that's the stick approach. And what it does is it instills a wisdom fear. Might have to lower that down. It instills a wisdom fear in our minds to really understand the disadvantages of not remembering death, because we see the results and we don't want those results. All right, so this is looking at, if we don't remember death, some of the unhappy, unsatisfactory, regretful things that will happen as a result. Because we're creating the causes, once again, for what we're going to experience in the future. Okay, so now we get to look at the carrot approach, which is the advantages of meditating on death. And here's what they say in the Gomchen Lamrim. Maintaining the idea that you will not die is the source of all misery, while awareness of death is a mine, gold mine, silver mine, of all excellence. In brief, at this time when you have attained the means to achieve being's goals, so you have the opportunity to achieve awakening in order to benefit all living beings. That's what this time is about, creating the causes for our awakening in order to benefit all beings. Understand the faults of postponing Dharma practice, of sleep and lethargy, meaningless talk, food and drink, parentheses, excessive emailing, surfing the net, texting, distractions, and so forth, and instill in your heart the uncertainty regarding the time of your death. Okay? So the wise, the mind of all excellence, really understands the disadvantages of thinking about all the fleeting things of this life, and to really bring into our hearts that the time of death is that death is certain and the time of death is uncertain. Okay, so the benefits of remembering death. Okay, so here's what happens if we take time during the course of our day, maybe the first thing when we wake up in the morning, maybe as we pour our cup of tea, maybe when we see the sun setting, just to think about that death is certain. First of all, we will act meaningfully. All right, so the whole purpose of our life starts to have meaning. We will have an inner discipline, so no one has to force us to practice. We won't waste any time. And so Venerable at this point, she says, wouldn't that be nice to have that kind of discipline, to have that kind of impetus, to have that kind of enthusiasm for spiritual practice? We have this inner discipline that even if we wake up groggy in the morning, we don't feel well, we still get out of bed. For us who live at the Abbey here, we go to the hall. For those of you who live in town, you get up and you go to your little space, your little meditation space where you got your cushion, your altar, or just even a quiet place in your room. We're not easily distracted by emails and invitations to the movies or looking at the news. We know that we need to create the causes for another precious human life so that we can continually have these lives, one after the other, to create the causes for awakening. So practicing the Dharma is what we set our sights on. So life becomes totally meaningful. Our practice becomes rich. It becomes enthusiastic. It becomes really sort of the focus of our life. And as a result, we turn away also from harmful actions and focus on creating virtue. So So I got into some of the teachings that Lama Zopa did about death. And he wants us to understand that not only is it important for us to remember death, but he says that many of the great yogis, these great spiritual practitioners, have got their start by meditating on the shortness of human life, impermanence and death, that their realizations, their practice itself all starts with thinking about death. Their strength and ability to live an ascetic life in extremely isolated places, to be able to practice very vast, complicated, profound subjects, no matter how long it takes, they do that without any hesitation. And that they gain realizations and attain the higher paths, no matter how difficult they are, all comes from thinking about death. So it's not like us ordinary beings think about death. The great yogis think about deaths. The bodhisattvas think about deaths. Even the Buddhas, to get where they are, they all began thinking about the fleeting nature of their lives. So we have to remember that this is something that is a constant thing that we need to familiarize ourselves, and that the great beings accomplish what they do because they've used this as one of their practices. The second one is that positive actions will be powerful and effective because we're unattached to worldly things. Okay, so we're not going to react with anger or attachment in regards to worldly things. We're going to be able to concentrate on what we're doing. So not to react from our afflictive states of mind, but from our virtuous states of mind. For example, to be generous because we can't take any of our stuff with us. So instead we practice generosity and give it away. We simplify our lives, give it away with a generous heart. We don't harm others because of our awareness of death. We always monitor our actions and ask what I'm doing. What are the results going to be if I do what I'm doing right now? So we think about our future rebirths. We cultivate a mind that's always aware of our precepts, our ethical values, and as a result, this introspective awareness that's always watching what we're doing, what we're saying, what we're thinking, increases exponentially. How are folks doing so far? A few people looking out the window, a few people squirming. Are you all doing okay? It's very, and once again, look at your life and just see if this stuff makes sense. Okay, there is a verse in the 37 practices that brings to mind positive actions will be powerful and effective because we're unattached to worldly things. It says, in brief, whatever you are doing, ask yourself, what's the state of my mind? With mindfulness and constant awareness, accomplish others' good. So as soon as anger arises in the mind, as soon as fear arises in the mind, this introspective awareness, knowing that what our minds are doing in this life matters on how death is going to be experienced and how our future lives are going to be. So become very vigilant about the state of our mind, what we do with our actions, what we do with our speech. Also, remembering death makes Dharma practice much easier. It's not to make us feel depressed or hopeless, but to ask ourselves what's important in my life and to stay steady on what's important and meaningful. We don't doubt what we're doing. We don't care what other people think about what we're doing because we know what we're doing is meaningful and beneficial. It's so important. It's just thinking about death. It just kind of cuts to the chase. All the stuff we're attached to, our reputation, our fame, possessions, just cuts that away. Number 3, the importance of remembering death is that it's important in the beginning of the path. So even if we're just starting to have a spiritual practice, it gets us going on the path. Lama Zopa Rinpoche says remembering impermanence and death is useful because it persuades us, or he says obliges us to seek out the Dharma, to begin to practice, to meditate, and instead of following our negative minds and acting opposite to the Dharma. So from the very get-go, it helps us to sort of on the gross level sort of clean up our act. Like the Buddha who became a wandering mendicant after seeing death, we need to ask ourselves what's the meaning of our life, what's important here, what can I take with me, and what can't I take with me. So it helps us to prioritize what's going on in our life, what we're treasuring, what we're finding important. Just as the Buddha began to realize, if death is coming, he sees this dead body, this corpse, and saying, I am heading in that direction too. What do I have to do to really attain my deepest aspirations? So death becomes a real pivotal topic to make some serious decisions about what we're going to do with our life. And sometimes, I don't know if you've experienced this, but when you have the death of somebody who's really near and dear to you, have you found that it really makes you shift and look at your life in a different way? If you've lost somebody who's very dear to you, you say, what am I doing? They're gone. How can I use their death to sort of propel me, to sort of enrich my life, to make my life more meaningful? The fourth of importance of remembering death is that it's good for the middle of the path because it keeps us realistic, helps us to persevere and not lose interest, encourages us not to give up. Even though we're in the middle of the path, By following the path, Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, and remembering death, we keep from losing our realizations and continue on to the higher reaches of the path. In the beginning, we're okay because we see that virtuous thoughts help. Like in the beginning, you can see that the Dharma really helps. You're not so angry. You're not so attached. You have a little bit more patience. You're able to understand people a little bit better. But, you know, after practicing for 2 years or 2 months, we get a little impatient. Our expectations don't quite meet, you know, what's realistically happening in our minds. So rather than having this long-term view, we get really, really impatient. So having death in the middle of our practice brings our expectations down to a little bit more realistic level. After all, we've been in cyclic existence since beginningless time. That's how long we've been creating destructive actions. So it's unrealistic to think that we're going to be able to eliminate them. We're going to be able to cultivate all the good qualities in a very, very short time. So thinking about death in the middle of the path, we become more patient and more realistic with our practice. And at the end of the path, it keeps us focused on the long-term goal of awakening. Bodhisattvas think of it. They stay focused on their goals. This is also impermanence, this beautiful storm. Purifying the air. Passing, changing moment by moment. Just as we are changing moment by moment, getting closer to death. So bodhisattvas are great beings that need great energy in order to overcome the difficulties of practicing the Dharma and following the path. So where does such energy come from? It comes from remembering impermanence of life and death. So meditating even at the very end of the path, when we're far along the path, remembering death really enlivens and really helps us to it helps us to focus deeply, because by the time we get to be very, very far along on the path, the realizations become very, very deep and very, very subtle. And so it keeps us, once again, very focused and very, very clear about the long-term goal of why we're doing what we're doing. And last but not least, and this is something that's really, I think, brings a certain level of joy, is that if we remember death, we die happily and pleasantly, because we've spent all of our life cultivating love, patience, understanding, bodhicitta, gratitude, forgiveness. We've familiarized our minds with virtue. So when the time of death comes, we meditate and let go of this life like a bird taking off and flying away. Can you imagine having the experience of death be that way? And they say for very advanced practitioners, the bodhisattvas, the great beings, people like the yogis that are meditating all of their life on the Dharma, it's like going home. For people that are practicing in the middle of the path, they have no regret, they have no worry, and they have a lot of confidence that they will have another good rebirth, and that they will be able to continue practicing like a simple matter of changing form, continuing our practice with a fresh new body. So that at the time of death we go, okay, let that old body go. I've created the causes to have another precious human life. I'm confident about that because of the state of my mind right now as I'm dying. So I could use a better form. I could use a healthy young body because I'm going to continue to practice the Dharma. And for those of us at the beginning, if we're practicing and remembering death as best as we can daily, we won't be upset or afraid. We've been practicing long enough that we won't have any fear at death. We can be, relax and not be afraid. And I don't know about you, but I think that's a pretty awesome state of mind to have at the time of death. So I want to share with you a beautiful analogy. The actual way to become mindful of death from Geshe Nawandarke. There isn't any analogy in here on hail, thunder, and windstorms that are going on, but we've got some analogies here of some natural things. Huh? Oh, yeah, yeah. But we can see how the storm is moving. You know, things are changing moment by moment. And our minds and our bodies that are experiencing it right now are changing moment by moment. Okay. Things have alluring, beautiful names like spring, summer, and so on. But such ephemeral phenomena can teach us that everything constantly changes, including thunder, hailstorms. Even the colors of the foliage can do this. First there is green, then everything turns orange, and finally becomes all brown and barren. Streams which in the summer were sparkling blue with ripples like beautiful dancers and enchanting bubbling sounds freeze over in winter and underneath make a grumbling noise like somebody muttering. A similar process happens to us. When we are young, we go to many parties, we dance, sing, and make merry. But when we grow old, our habits and appearances change, and we just sit heavy in our chair, making muttering sounds like the frozen stream. So we have to remember, you know, by the time we get there, what's our minds going to be like? When there is a beautiful garden in the summer, the bees come humming about to take the nectar of flowers. Likewise, when we are young, we joyfully partake of whatever pleasures we can find. But in autumn, the delicate flower garden becomes brown like a desert, and in winter, no one wishes to go there and see everything bare, with only the wind mournfully moaning. Our old age and death are exactly the same. Everyone deserts us when our youthful glory has withered, and we are left sadly alone. This is what happens if you don't think about death, is that old age becomes this decrepit, unhappy, what to do, you know, like the frozen stream and the dead leaves. The most immediate teacher for becoming mindful of non-staticness and death is our own physical form. We can no longer do what we did in our youth. We come slower in our ways, and our appearances change markedly. It can be very helpful to remove all of our cosmetics and have an honest look at ourselves. So to become mindful of our death is to look at how we are like the seasons. We are like the flowers in the garden. Okay, so here's a famous quote. The impermanence of the three worlds is like autumn clouds. Being's birth and death is like watching scenes from a play. Being's lives pass like flashes of lightning in the sky, and are swiftly swept like water down a steep mountainside. These are all analogies about the fleeting nature of this life. So the impermanence of the three worlds is like the autumn clouds. So when you look at the autumn clouds, this realm that we live in is called the desire realm because we have all these senses. We look at the clouds, we look at the flowers, we look at the good food, we hear the beautiful music, we taste the beautiful drinks. But like the autumn clouds, continually moving, continually changing, nothing stays the same. Being's birth and death is like watching scenes from a play. So our lives are just like watching a movie or watching a play. You watch it, it brings up all sorts of emotions. There's all sorts of things going on in our lives. But they're changing moment by moment. They don't last. They don't appear as they don't exist as they appear. They're not real. It's just like a play. And at the end, the curtain's going to go down. The actor's going to exit. And that's going to be the end of the play. So our lives are like that. They're like plays. We play all sorts of cast of characters. The prop goes up, the scenery goes down, there's all this shuffling going on, and at the end, the actor exits the stage and the play is over. Beings' lives pass like flashes of lightning in the sky. During thunderstorms, lightning doesn't last long. Sometimes you barely catch it out of the corner of your eye. At the end of your life, it's gone like a flash, even though during our lives it seemed to be a long life. So Venerable goes on to this wonderful analogy. She says, when folks write to us at the Abbey and ask us to make prayers for people that have died, we have to understand that that person no longer exists. The aggregates, the body, the form, the compositional factors, the discrimination, that name was designated on are gone. We're dedicating for this person. There's a name, they might have some possession somewhere. There's a slideshow on a computer somewhere that totally has all the photos of their life. But that person that we're dedicating for, that was labeled on those aggregates in this life, no longer exists. You have the continuity of that person, but the body has been buried or burned. The consciousness of a human being has been let go of, and new mental aggregates have been taken up. So to understand that at the end of this life, who we are sitting here identified as, Julie and Wendy and Dan and Ken, they're going to have all these photos about our lives, they're going to have all of our possessions, they're going to reminisce, and we're not going to be here. We're going to be gone. The continuity, our consciousness will go on to another life, pick up another body in some realm, hopefully this realm, but we're gone. All that's left is photos, possessions, a few memories. We have to remember that. So we get pissed off and we get upset and we get angry and jealous, is to realize at the end this is what's going to happen. What do I want to do with my life? So that at the time of death I can just let go. So the person we dedicate for having a fortunate rebirth no longer exists. And lastly, we are swiftly spent like water down a steep mountainside, like a waterfall or a rushing stream with no way to stop it. So one of the points of death is that we can't hit the pause button. So we're having a really good time, we can't hit the pause button and say, gosh, I want to savor this moment. Or if we're having suffering, can we speed this up a little bit to get over it? Life is going on moment by moment. We can't stop it. We can't hit the pause button. We can't slow it down to save our life. So these images are good to bring them to mind and let them percolate. People live and die in towns and cities in this country, and there is no evidence of them ever being there. The city, the town, the countryside change. The places see so many people come and go. People live in a city, they abide there, they grow, they have their families, they go to school, they work, and they die. It's like they're gone. Life goes on. Somebody else moves into the house. The town grows, the town has a fire. All those lives lived, arising, abiding, and ceasing all the time, continuously without stopping, just like a stream rushing down a mountainside, or like the flash of lightning in the sky. So really important to think about death. Any comments or insights or questions? We're going to do a little meditation on this, but I want to make sure that folks are still hanging in there. Are people getting a sense that if we really understand the fleeting nature of our life, how we're going to be able to let go of a lot of things that concern us, the small, petty, unimportant things of life that don't matter in the end, that we're going to think about, life is so short and I have no idea when I'm going to die. How it would get us to refigure what we're doing and how we're living our life. It's not like we have to do things differently, but we have to do them with a motivation that maybe has some kindness in it, maybe has some wisdom in it, maybe has some compassion in it, because we really don't know when it's going to happen. And that by clearing the decks of all the extraneous, trivial stuff, learning to transform our minds into minds of love and compassion, that we've got this kind of clarity that arises in our minds. There's this kind of joy because we put down all the stuff that really doesn't matter, all the things that bring unhappiness, all the things that bring discontent in our life. And as a result, there's kind of this lightness in our minds because we've thought about how precious this life is that we have. And that's where the joy can happen. Now, this isn't something that you're going to be able to just like tonight, we're going to do this meditation, you're going to have all this instantaneous joy arise. Okay? Because we don't equate joy with death. We don't equate peace of mind with death. But if as we do this meditation tonight on death, is to look at your life and go, is this true about what the Buddha is saying? And to see what the conclusions are. And to think, if you can say, if I think about death in this way, how will I live my life maybe a little bit differently? Because there is joy in this. But we have to be willing to look at death in a very, very different way, the way in which we've been conditioned to look at it. Yeah, Ken.
enjoying ourselves this weekend, for example, it will seem Sunday afternoon will be here too quickly, like really fleeting. On the other hand, if, let's say I'm on call for the weekend, it seems like it drags. It's so slow. But in actual fact, it's the same time. You know, it doesn't speed up, it doesn't slow down, but we tend to look at it like that. You know, that when we're enjoying ourselves, things just don't last. They seem to go too quickly before it's over. And when we're not enjoying ourselves, it just seems like it takes forever. And it's all in our mind.
Yeah. So with that kind of reasoning, it would think that the more virtue we have in our life, the more quickly life will go, but the happier we will be. And rather than to have a life that's filled with a lot of upset unhappiness, we'll just drag along to where we're just wishing it would get over. And it is a state of mind. I mean, like you're saying, time is kind of like marching on. What our minds do with it is always an interesting experience. Yeah, Venerable Semkye.
Comments online. Cheryl writes, what I have to remember is that our efforts are important even if we're not perfect yet in how we live.
Well spoken.
And Tracy writes, this teaching makes me think about how important it is to live in a way that we have no regrets when others die too, as well as when we die.
Very important point. Something about, so Tracy's saying that if we live our practice of remembering death, is that when our loved ones die, because we have such a clear, clean relationship with them, keeping our priorities straight in life, that when they die, we won't go into personal distress. We won't have regrets. I wish I would have said, I love them. I wish I would have forgiven them. I wish I would have asked for forgiveness. Is that it really cleans up our relationships to the people in our life. Yeah, and that the little things do matter, as Cheryl said. Yeah, we're not perfect for sure. Yeah, Trace.
I've been spending a lot of time with someone who is dying, and time has run out for them, you know, and they may have regrets, they may want to say or do things, but there's no option, there's no changing anything. It's over basically. So it just really it's very, very poignant how, you know, you can wish all you want, you have more time, but when it's done, it's done. And so, yes, now is the time to do it.
Yeah.
To do your practice.
Yeah. So the state of a person's mind at death is really, really important, because at the end there isn't anything left to say. And there's a poignancy because you've been experiencing this, and it's helped you to maybe take the meditation on death a little bit more to your heart, because you're seeing it kind of, you know, what does spiritual practice really mean? What does having meaning in my life mean? Can I use this dying as a gift for your own practice? Is that what's happening for you? Is the poignancy?
The urgency, I guess, that, well, you know, no matter how much a person may wish they had more time,
They don't.
it ain't gonna happen.
Yeah. Yep.
Wishing won't make it so.
Yeah. Yeah. Sad truth about it. Yeah, Jim.
I definitely have found just imagining if I died tomorrow, what would I regret in the way that I'm living today is just a really powerful practice for providing a lot of motivation, and just like thinking of really either specific habits that I have that, you know, are just causing pain or are, you know, withholding in relationships or whatever, or just certain specific things that I really wanted to do. And that's been a really nice focusing point for me in actually kind of changing either relationships or actions. Behaviors or whatever. It's been really powerful.
Wow. So thinking about just, I'm going to die tomorrow. And by thinking of that, saying, okay, what is it about today that I want to change, if that were true?
Right.
And it might be true. So using it to really clarify your relationships, to work on habits that you don't want to have at the moment of death, So you've been using it as a powerful tool to take care of business, sounds like.
And then an intermediate thing, instead of just thinking about death, when I'm making a big deal out of something, I also like to think about, am I even going to remember this in 5 years? Right? Like, is this going to be something that I even care about, like, will even remember or care about in 5 years? So when I'm attached to this situation and the strong feelings of frustration or anger or jealousy or whatever, I also just think about, like, will I even remember it? Really that big deal, you know, like a couple years from now, will I even remember this happened? And that helps loosen that really
Tight grip. Yeah, the beauty of impermanence, for sure. And that the mind's changing moment by moment, and chances are that won't be remembered. Yeah. Melissa?
Sometimes people have aversion to thinking or talking about death. And I think if we have that, we need to look at why. Some of that could be superstition. That we think that thinking about or talking about death
Is going to create the causes.
But that's totally a non-concordant, I would say. And maybe also, well, it's good to look at why.
Mm-hmm.
If we have any aversion
To death, yeah.
not be afraid of it.
Yeah. So thinking about death, some folks have a superstitious thought that by thinking about it is going to bring it about, and that just simply isn't true. And so to be able to look more deeply about why am I so afraid of it. And that's a great sort of a deep reflection on what that fear can be. Yeah, what's causing that trepidation and that aversion, for sure. I think a lot of it is just the fear of pain, the pain of dying. I've heard that a lot of times. Yeah.
I think for me what it means meditating on death, it's not as much as death itself, but knowing that it could happen anytime. I don't know. Right now, am I using my life to create virtues, to create non-virtues? And I hear so many times people, I work in an hospital, people die with a lot of regrets, and people very grumpy, and others die with so much peace. And if you look at how they live their lives with no regret, let go of the jealousy, let go of the anger, let go of what is, I think is so important, but really, is it really important? That's for me what means thinking of that.
Is the uncertainty of it. That
I never know where it's going to happen, and how
do I want in my mind?
if I, the things, the thunder can fall on us in 5 minutes.
Yeah,
Who knows?
yeah, yeah.
How do I want my state of mind
Yep.
to be at?
Knowing that the time of death is totally unknown.
Yeah. So it's not about, oh my God, yeah. It's nothing about it.
Mhm.
It's just to encourage me to develop virtue,
Mhm.
to develop being a good human being.
Yeah.
Sometimes I have that image that a little character that I have, a little old woman with her cane. Hey, you idiot! Yeah.
So she's keeping tabs on you to make sure that you're.
Do I want to die like that?
No. So the old woman with the cane is not going to be present.
Because they say that the mind stays, that the continuum stays. So, I don't want those ever again,
Well, what our minds are habituated to of this life at the time of death, that's where it's going to be. I mean, that's one of the most powerful truths about this. In the beginning there, when I was talking about the motivation, is that maybe this is certainly a general misunderstanding, and I had this for a long time, and I still sometimes have it, is that I think at the time of death, because I have the Dharma in my life, even though sometimes I just don't practice it very well, that I'm going to be able to turn my mind at that moment and have all those good qualities that I've been wanting to cultivate all my life at the time of death, even though I haven't done any kind of homework, I haven't done any familiarization. To realize, so if we want to know what our mind's going to be at the time of death, just look at it right now. What is our mind doing in the course of a day? That's a total sort of reality check on what it's going to be like when we die. And if that isn't some sort of momentum and something to kind of provoke us into doing some major thought training and to do some purification and to do some kind deeds, so that that mind gets lifted and bright, the way that Jim's doing it, just, okay, let's take a handle on this stuff. So important, so important. Let's see if we can do somebody else.
It's interesting that this is the ground, because I'm pretty young, but I'm the type of person who thinks I think about death every day. It's really interesting, and just kind of being able to accept the ambiguity of what it is, the fact that we don't know when it is uncertain, being able to accept that and find that and really more able to live in the present. So when I am flowing through painful emotion, sadness, or whatever, I can romanticize that. I'm literally coddling myself when I go through that, because it's about a balance, really, death and life. So if you're so focused about death and this negative thing, it's not doing its purpose. It's really just kind of accepting it as is, because I think that's what everything is. I feel like life comes with an as is sticker on it. And so
It comes with a what?
It comes with an as is sticker.
As is sticker.
Getting old and being an older person, but now it's almost exciting because I've just accepted that it could really be anything where I might not get old, and it's really I don't know what the word is, almost relieving, I guess, because even when you are hurting terribly, I had a friend who was murdered about a year ago, and that was one of the most painful things I ever experienced, but I can still romanticize that feeling because it's really important, and I can see how opposite it is.
Yeah. So holding the fact that death is certain as a life-affirming, joy-giving experience for you, rather than looking at it as the end of something, is to really make your life enriched and alive. As is. And growing and nourishing those good qualities, Yeah, it's a wonderful attitude to have for being so young, I have to say. Yeah, Dan.
I was just thinking too about how it's still very interesting to me, even though intellectually we know we're going to die, even if it's just how shocked and surprised we are when it does happen. All over the news, Prince died, right? So, and it's very clear that people are shocked by this. He's 57 years old, he's a rock star, he's not supposed to die. What do you mean he's not supposed to die? I mean, it's fascinating, that, because I think on some level, okay, the death meditations, we don't know when the time of death is, but then there's this part of me that has this image of me, with a cane, yelling at the kids.
Yelling at Venerable, yes.
And all that stuff. But who knows? I could go to sleep tonight and not wake up in the morning.
Yeah.
So also I was thinking about my mind state when I go to sleep. What is it? And what is it when I wake up? And how much gratitude do I have? And how was my motivation for the day? Was my motivation before I go to bed?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's there's no guarantees, actually.
Yeah. And those rock stars in our life that leave us, I think they're great gifts to show us that no matter how wealthy you are, how famous you are, how beautiful you are, when the causes for our existence cease, that's it. We can really use his death as a motivating factor to say, there's nobody that gets excluded from this experience. And the fact that you take little pieces of your life and use them to create virtue, what's the state of my mind when you go to bed? What's the state of mind when you get up? You take these little points of your life that are important and you really create virtue in them. And then they will start to sort of line up. So there's one after the other. So your whole day you're going to have that mindfulness, remembering that death is uncertain. The time of death is uncertain. Sounds like you're using it really beautifully, Dan. And sometimes it's going to be intellectual, but it sounds like you're making it a little bit realer. It's a lot of familiarity with it, for sure. Yeah.
I'd just like to add that I think it's important to recognize that this topic is not about being morbid. Oh, you're Buddhist, you're always on something negative. It's realistic. It's realistic. The Buddha was so realistic. He just said, look, this is the way it is. Take a look. If you want to stop suffering, this is the way it is, like you said. And the more we can accept how it is, the more we can use it to progress along the path, rather than resisting or denying or pretending.
Yeah.
Focus on your strengths rather than negative.
Yeah.
What'd you say?
Focus on your strength. Any strength. There's always something positive to pull from any situation.
Yeah. That the Buddha was very realistic about, okay, folks, this is the truth of the matter here. And I'm going to, the teachings basically show us how to look at death so that we can have the kind of life that you're talking about, that we can have the kind of priorities and meaning. It's just a matter of, but this is what it is. All compounded phenomena are impermanent. Okay.
I know, for me, I'm on my 10th year of dealing with invasive breast cancer, and came really close to dying last year. Spent a long time in the hospital during treatment. And what I've noticed is I'm willing to talk about my passing with others, but others are not willing to talk about it with me. Not me, my doctors are.
Your mom and dad, your friends, your family?
I understand that my children, it's frightening too, and that it's frightening to my partner. My parents, it's taboo.
Mhm.
And, I believe I've had one person approach me to talk about, what does that look like? And how are you? How do you feel?
Being that close. Yeah.
What is weird? That people don't want to talk about it. That, I know that it's uncomfortable for others. I know that it's a probably near reality for me, and that I've come to some
Self-acceptance. Yeah.
but others are freaked out about it.
Yeah. So having a very serious disease that almost took your life, and who knows what the future will bring, that your family has a hard time talking about it with you and your friends. Yeah. Well.
Most people are uncomfortable about that.
Yeah. But I would have to think that the way in which you live your life from now on is going to somehow help them to know that, your understanding that it's okay may actually benefit them in some way without having to say much. To kind of take the pressure off of them to have a process with you, but to really live your life like you are. And that'll really make a big difference for them. Yeah, thank you for sharing. Okay.
I also imagine that it would be a real relief to be able to talk about it.
Yeah.
So I think I just want to invite people to the Abbey.
We talk about it. Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes the attachment to our loved ones is so strong that it's hard to approach it. But with people who understand and appreciate your journey, it would be an honor. So, yeah. Okay, let's do one more, Ken. Yeah.
Just a question. Do we have more difficulty with this issue in the West than Eastern cultures do?
We don't have anybody in our Eastern culture here.
My counselor, she actually studies psychics and stuff like that, and how just the idea of death, intuition, unity, and stuff like that is very strange in Western culture compared to an Eastern culture. The way we just kind of talk about it, like we said, we talk about it's kind of taboo here, but as far as what she shared with me, she was on a lot of other places. Are really more accepting of that sort of taboo stuff, and it's not even sort of more accepting. It's just that it's not taboo there.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not. It's just a matter of fact.
Mm-hmm.
People experience all sorts of different things, and seems like here we're not as willing to share our experiences.
Yeah.
I wish we could.
Yeah, I don't know particularly. I mean, Venerable has told stories about some of the, her experience with some of the Tibetan lamas and meditators that have died, and it was basically like going on a picnic, So for some of the experiences, that's due to the level of their practice and their understanding about, the Dharma. But as far as just general Asian cultures, I really don't know. I mean, Venerable Damcho would probably have a better sense of that, or Xiao Yin, or maybe even Venerable.
She did share a story about how, she helped
Yeah.
was coming out of this
Yeah,
body,
yeah.
and Westerner, we need to do something with it.
Yeah,
No, he's dying, let him die, let him go.
yeah.
But there's a difference. We're talking about Buddhist
Just-
monastics who've been practicing for many, many, many years.
Yeah, rather than the general,
Not the general.
general ordinary folks like us. I don't know the answer. I mean, they do in India. They have the bodies are out in the backyard, and they put them in the Ganges and they cremate them. It's a lot more obvious. I mean, the death is more exposed and seen in everyday life. Here, we've got it sort of sequestered in nursing homes and hospitals and things. Yeah. So, but it's
Very sterile here. That is very much in a hospital bed, your pumps and your cleanliness and your nurses, where in a lot of places, and there's some places that eat their, eat their family when they die because it's becoming one of them. Like there's all sorts of interesting traditions on death, and in Western cultures, death is
Yeah.
sterile.
Yeah. Well, we're slowly changing that with hospice and things like that. Yeah, but I'd be curious to know how different the thinking is. Yeah.